Undead are those who cannot die even after death. For immortals who escape the cycle of life and death, dominating one dimension was not difficult. It was only a matter of time before the dimension called Earth was conquered, or so they thought. But the reality turned out to be different. The skeleton put out his finger, pointing at something ahead, and shouted that this couldn't happen. He was dreaming. In the reflections of the flames and the roar of explosions, he saw a simple person. He could not survive there, but nevertheless, he was alive and well. The undead's answer was words coming from the wall of fire. Who knows how? Probably because he is stronger than any undead. A face distorted with a terrible smile emerged from the flames, and the iron fist slammed into the skull of the undead. It shattered into its component parts. The bones flew into the air. 2 years ago in the evening, a man stood in the middle of the room with his head down. The woman sternly told him that she allowed him to live here because he said he was looking for a job, and he spends his days just drinking and playing cards. If he continues to behave this way, then let him pack his things and go to his dad and mom. Kang Hyun was very upset. He can't rely on his parents at that age. The girl screamed that she, his little sister, was okay, and the guy has an allowance. Tomorrow is New Year. Let him find a part-time job or any other. Kang Hyun suggested we talk about this tomorrow. His head is spinning now. He went into his wretched room. It was unpleasant for him to hear screams outside the door. Sighing heavily, he fell onto the bed. He was pathetic and wondered why he lived like this. The only thing he achieved after arriving in Seoul was an internship at a large corporation. He needs to find a job in a warehouse or somewhere else. The computer screen flickered dimly in the dark room. Kang Hyun remembered that he forgot to turn off the game before leaving. He wondered how much better real life would be if it were a video game. There he would definitely be able to find a pretty decent job. A warrior, a wizard, a swordsman. His eyes slowly closed, he fell asleep. A minute later he was already fast asleep, without turning off his computer, the screen of which lit up with a strange glow and text appeared on the display. A common connection with the Haken dimension was discovered. Kang Hyun was fast asleep, and extraordinary events were unfolding around him in his room. The system reported that Earth's defenses were activated, and communication with the Haken dimension is temporarily prohibited. Training will begin on Earth. Kang Hyun suddenly opened his eyes and saw that his room and bed had disappeared, and he was sitting in a sparkling stream of lights. He widened his eyes, trying to figure out what the hell was going on here. Where was he? A screen appeared in front of him, but the words blurred before his eyes and he could not read anything. The system signaled that the time until full connection with the Haken dimension was 4 years, 364 days, 23 hours 59 minutes, 27 seconds, 26 seconds. Finally, the guy was able to read the words on the screen. Welcome to Mr. Kang Hyun's entry into teaching. There are 8 stages in total. Death in this place is not connected with reality. You can't give up halfway. If you fail, you can try again. When the training is completed, awakening and reward will come. Kang Hyun was sure that only severe gambling addicts in need of treatment could dream of such a thing. In despair, he covered his face with his hands. He mentally promised his sister Aiken that he would find a job. But on the other hand, this is just a dream. Maybe this is a sign to give it your all in the game for the last time. The guy's thinking was just another game. He perked up. The system announced the entrance to the first stage, and everyone believes that the guy's courage will save the Earth. Kang Hyun didn't quite understand what he was supposed to save. The first stage had already begun, and the guy had to prove his courage and defeat what he fears most. The conditions for passing are to reach the destination point at the end of the bridge. The condition for failure is death. At the same moment, the situation in front of the guy changed greatly. He just rolled his eyes. Where did he end up? People walked across thin stone bridges on a blazing ocean of lava. Kang Hyun stood on one of these bridges and felt the terrible heat from the boiling lava. Who are all these people? What's happening? He was definitely at home. What a stupid dream. The heat that engulfed his body showed that this was not a dream at all. On a nearby bridge, he noticed Kan Aiken, his sister. He asked her what the hell she was doing in his dream, and the girl replied that she was going to ask him the same thing. She doubted it was a dream. In her dream, they suddenly started talking about saving the Earth, and here she is. Kang Hyun sternly told her not to act like this was her dream. This was always his dream. The girl continued to doubt. How can lava be so hot in a dream? And how can you have natural conversations in your sleep? Something is wrong here. Kang Hyun laughed. The brain is easy to fool. People always say they don't feel pain in their sleep, but that's a lie. In his dreams, there were often cases when it seemed to him that he was peeing, but the next morning the bed was dry. The sister became convinced that her brother was an idiot. The guy decided to move forward and stepped on the narrow stone bridge with one foot. The conditions say that you need to reach the end of the bridge. If it is his dream that his sister cannot realize this, the girl got angry. She read it too. She held onto the wall and couldn't bring herself to take a step. Is your brother not afraid that he will fall? Kang Hyun noted that if he falls, he will wake up, that's all. At this time, a man flew down and could not stay on his bridge. He fell straight into the lava and died there with a terrible cry. Jurat and his sister watched in horror as a cloud of black smoke rose above the lava, all that was left of the man. Kang Hyun was speechless and didn't know what to do now. This scream sounded so realistic, but he's not scared at all. This was not true, he was very scared. Aiken finally made up her mind and advised her brother not to move on his feet. It's probably safer to crawl along the moto. Kang Hyun tried to argue with his sister and said that it would come to that. Achin knew that her brother was stubborn to the end. People moved across their bridges in different ways. Some even tried to run across the bridge. The brother and sister decided not to risk it and crawled. Aiken asked her brother what he thought happened to them. Any ideas? The guy stubbornly replied that this was just a very realistic nightmare that he was having. The sister was sure that Kang Hyun already understood everything. There are no such realistic dreams. She believed that there was definitely something here. Something they can't even imagine has happened. If they die here, then perhaps in real life too. They crawled along a narrow bridge over the burning ocean. Kang Hyun could not stand it and yelled at his sister. He tried not to pay attention, but she did not shut up, and he was trembling all over with fear. He lay down in the middle of the bridge. His legs and arms were shaking. He asked his sister to wait for him. She assumed that her brother would now simply lie down on his side, as he always preferred to sleep. The guy looked at his sister. There is a chance that this is a dream, so if he lies down comfortably, then there is a chance that he will wake up in his room. The system issued a message that a certain time had passed since the start of training and the difficulty was increasing. The brother and sister raised their heads in horror and listened to the strange sounds. Bridges began to collapse. Shards of stones flew. This was not the time to stand still. All that was left was to run, and the people on the bridges rushed to the opposite wall. Akin jumped to her feet and ran as fast as she could. Kang Hyun shouted after her to wait for him. He couldn't bring himself to get up. Finally, he ran after his sister, and behind them their bridges were falling apart into stone crumbs. Kang Hyun consoled himself with the fact that the bridge was not too narrow, and if he didn't trip, he would have time to reach the end. He just needs to look forward and walk this path. A wall was visible ahead. They're almost there. Finally, this task is over. He did it. Suddenly a crash was heard from above, and he saw that the roof of the cave was cracking above them. Kan Aiken looked up in horror. She did not have time to reach the wall. A little more and the stones from above will break the bridge, and she will fall into the lava. At the last moment, Kang Hyun jumped onto his sister's bridge and grabbed her. And in a jump he threw her and himself to the saving wall. At the same moment the bridge collapsed. Its fragments burned even before reaching the lava. The system informed about the new level, and congratulated you on completing the first stage. They temporarily awakened to receive their reward for completing it, and they will officially awaken when training ends. Kang Hyun collapsed on the ground. He was so tired that he could not lift a finger. Aiken tried to comprehend what she had just read. Her brother asked if she was going to thank him for saving her. Aiken said thank you in confusion. A window with Kan Aiken data popped up on the screen. Strength was 7, agility was 12, and a unique ability was calm. The girl did not understand what it was. Her brother perked up at the sight of the status window. This is the thing every man wants for his birthday. Such a window also appeared in front of him. He looked into it. His unique ability was resurrection. Suddenly everything flashed before his eyes, and he woke up screaming. He was sitting on the bed in his room where he fell asleep last night. Was it just a dream? The next morning, all social networks were filled with messages. Someone fell into an abyss in their sleep and died. The whole family had the same dream. They all died. What does it mean? The news reported that even the Supreme Leader experienced hell. A chat has opened for everyone who has unique abilities. The system window reported that a little less than 5 years remained until full connection with the Hakan dimension. The next morning, brother and sister saw each other, and together remembered the details of last night. Where it was necessary to cross the bridge, Aiken almost died, and they came to the conclusion that it was not just a dream. They interrupted each other and shouted each their own. Finally they fell silent and buried themselves in the walls with their backs to each other. Then both, without saying a word, suggested having breakfast first. At breakfast, both looked at their phones and saw lists of ranks and news about an amazing dream. Aiken realized that this was not a simple dream, and not only in Korea, but all over the world that night people had the same dream. Kang Hyun also read the news and said that death in this dream does not affect reality. It is said that 3 or 4 out of 10 people fell, but there were no serious injuries. Aiken shuddered. It was still so realistic. Falling must hurt like hell. She heard that those who fell were really injured. And in general, is it normal for them to just sit and eat like that? And outside it seems like complete chaos is happening. Her brother replied that there was nothing they could do anyway. All that was left was to eat normally. He went to the window and pulled back the curtain. Is your sister going to plunge into this chaos outside? Outside, excited crowds grabbed supplies from boxes. They called for repentance, as the day of the Last Judgment had arrived. Stores were robbed and destroyed. Aiken confidently said that she and her brother would not be able to go outside. Kang Hyun agreed with her. If they go out now, they will only hurt themselves. He asked if Aiken remembered anything about the connection with the Haken dimension. The girl replied that it was said that they could check the remaining time before the temporary awakening. A system window opened in front of her. Kang Hyun also wanted to look at him. Nothing had changed. They had 5 years left. Kang Hyun looked out the window. Will people be able to prepare for such a situation in 5 years? There is chaos here now, but the situation will calm down soon. It's better to wait it out at home for now. In contrast to the chaos of the morning, nothing else of significance happened. By evening, most citizens returned to their daily lives. Thanks to this, stability was restored in Korea in just 1 day. And now the first day has come to an end. The system again invited Kang Hyun to study. He looked at his status window. Everything was the same as last night. He didn't know whether it was good or bad, because there was nothing to compare it with. Will he be able to use magic? The guy wasn't sure about this. But most of all, his attention was attracted by a unique ability, resurrection. This, according to Kang Hyun, was a very powerful superpower. The system window displayed the text that the ability to resurrect 24 hours after death, until the earth emerges from the crisis, is given to the guy. If the place of resurrection is not specified, it will occur in the last place of the dream. There are penalties that reduce the level of all abilities for 24 hours. Kang Hyun was delighted with this ability. He immediately agreed to go to the second stage of training. Like a miracle resurrector, what can he do? Before the start of the second stage, Kang Hyun was very excited about having the resurrection skill. No idea what will happen next. Right now he was fighting a huge goblin. The guy was armed with a heavy club, which was already covered in blood. Before coming here, he read that he must defeat all enemies and prove his skill. As an experienced gamer, he thought it could be combat since the system is similar to a game. And I was not mistaken. After a short battle, he cut off the goblin's head. Kang Hyun managed to take down the monster with a surprise attack using his mace, but the feeling of hitting a living creature made him tremble. It was the first time he had killed, and he felt like he was going to throw up. He knew he only won because it was a goblin, and the guy attacked him unexpectedly. Another monster with glowing eyes was looking at him from behind the wall. Kang Hyun jumped back and raised his mace. A stink goblin was approaching him with a huge cleaver in his hands. Kang Hyun realized that there were 2 goblins from the very beginning. Aren't goblins supposed to be a low-level mob for newbies? This one is much bigger than the one he killed, and the cleaver in his hands is more than 1 meter. You can die from such a blow. The goblin roared and rushed to attack the guy. Kang Hyun could only defend himself and retreat. The guy had a body chronically deprived of physical activity due to long-term unemployment, and the mace, the weapon he chose at the beginning of his training, was only 70 centimeters in length. The goblin knocked the mace out of Kang Hyun's hands, and he was left unarmed. Of course, his weapon could not withstand a meter-long cleaver. The goblin inflicted several wounds on the guy. He wondered why he had to go through this. Instead of killing the guy, the goblin dragged him along, grabbing him by the collar. Kang Hyun couldn't wait for him to finally wake up. Anyone please save. How much blood is there in the human body? Kang Hyun didn't realize this until his own blood was shed. The slowly approaching fear of death tightened coldly around his neck, and the agony that he endured for several hours until his breathing stopped. It was a merciless torture inflicted by 4 goblins. He woke up screaming wildly. His hair stood on end. On shaking legs, he ran out of his room. He had a very bad headache. Why is this crap happening again? Sestar poured him coffee, and he told her about what he had experienced that night. Aiken also died that night, but everything was not at all as her brother said. It's clear why he was crying. She asked if he needed to go to the hospital. The news said that the number of visitors to the psychiatric ward had doubled in the last 2 days. Many people must have had similar experiences. Kang Hyun didn't think he needed medical attention. Besides, he had no money. His sister advised him to earn money. But there was also good news. If Kang Hyun died, then his training seems to be over. People who died in the first stage never dreamed of the second stage. Kang Hyun sighed in relief. Today he will be able to sleep more peacefully. But the system responded with a message intended specifically for him. An error occurred at the second stage. Training continues. Immediate transition. May his courage save the earth. The guy was already warped by such news. Training stage 2, round 2 begins. Under the guy's incessant obscene screams, he fell into a black abyss. The system reported that since he was undergoing training, there would be no penalty for resurrection. He woke up in a dark cave. He passed out, fell asleep for several hours. He thought he would wake up in his bed, but this did not happen. He wanted to die, but he understood that even if he died, everything would happen again. He realized that he would have to do what they wanted from him. Besides, Kang Hyun was hungry. He stood up and went to choose his weapon. Last time he chose his mace. He chose it because it seemed simpler in terms of destructive power and use, but the close combat did not work out for him. Kang Hyun was wondering whether it was better to choose a bow or a crossbow, and for close combat, a spear is better than a sword. Finally he made his choice, spear and crossbow. Having gone to the rear of the goblins, Kang Hyun was going to show them the shooting skills of the South Korean reservist. He took aim with the crossbow and fired. The arrow flew between the goblins. One jumped away and the second turned to the guy. The monster's eyes burned with a terrible fire. This was Kang Hyun's plan. The goblins rushed towards him, and he deftly lifted the monster that ran first, not a spear. His plan worked. There is one less monster. Now all that remains is to deal with the second goblin, but the spear is stuck in the body of the dead goblin. The huge monster jumped up and attacked the unarmed Kang Hyun from above, and again the guy woke up in his room screaming. He was glad that this time he died quickly and without suffering. In the evening, the system reported that everything was starting all over again, and Kang Hyun gladly sent her away. Training, second stage, third round. Today's weapons are sword and shield. But wouldn't it be better to use the weapon he had already used? No. Let there be a sword. Kang Hyun spent the entire day studying on video. He went out to the bastards and prepared to attack. And he woke up again in his bed. These creatures attacked him. He was unable to react. Aiken looked into his room. The brother laughed hysterically. I'll have to try again. He sent the system with its stupid messages about courage and saving the earth. The fourth round has begun. At first he just waved his sword aimlessly, because judging by the status window, this is the standard method. System reported that his stamina increases by 1 due to his efforts to overcome his limits. Statistics increase due to efforts. Does he really have to swing a sword for 8 hours to level up? The status window is opened. Stamina 8, magical power 14, additional skills 1. Kang Hyun thought about it. He got it all when he passed the first stage. He invested 1 point in strength. With a total of 2 points, he planned to take revenge on the goblins. But he was too exhausted, so he couldn't take down a single one and died immediately. He woke up screaming again in his room. How it bothered him. Fifth round. Stamina increased by 1 from working with a sword. The result is death and awakening. Sixth round. Strength increased by 1 after 10 hours of training. Now it became easier to deal with 2 goblins. But Kang Hyun fundamentally lacked physical strength and combat abilities, and he could not cope with the rest. In the 7th round he simply swung his sword. And he began to swing it until the system showed that his stamina was increasing by 1 due to the fact that Kang Hyun was trying to go beyond his limits. The guy fell to the ground exhausted. A status window opened in front of him. Basic fencing created. It helps correct posture and distribute force when swinging a sword, allowing you to strike more effectively. This is a fencing skill used by local bandits, but it's better than nothing at all. It looks like the system was bullying Kang Hyun, but he was very happy. He did it. Today will be the end of the damned green bastards. In the second stage of training, there are 5 damn goblins. 2 are at the beginning of the fortress, and 3 are in the second half of the forest. The first 2 were simple. Kang Hyun unexpectedly attacked the first monster with a crossbow, and then dealt with the third with a sword. The problem was the 3 remaining in the forest. Kang Hyun dealt with the 2 just as he did with the first. But the last one became a real test. Kang Hyun fought the goblin with all his might. The goblin attacked very quickly and strongly, but Kang Hyun saw his attacks, and he felt that his body could react even before the guy thought about it. He deftly dodged the monster's blows. This was the effect of the basic swordsmanship that he received, although the description of this effect irritated Kang Hyun greatly. He attacked the goblin with his sword. The sword whistled close to the monster's neck, but he managed to dodge. There was one more problem. Kang Hyun was already exhausted and had lost a lot of stamina while fighting the 4 goblins. The monster swung his battle axe, deflecting Kang Hyun's blow, and he knocked my guy out of his hands. The sword flew far back and stuck into the ground. Kang Hyun stood in front of the goblin completely unarmed. The goblin swung his axe, but the guy leaned back and avoided the fatal blow. The monster was in no hurry to kill the enemy. He played with him like a cat with a mouse, but Kang Hyun perfectly calculated the enemy's movements. They were obvious to him. He rushed to his sword. On the way, he grabbed a stone and heartily hit the green monster in the face. The goblin growled, revealing sharp teeth. He was blinded by the blow and waved his arms randomly in the hope of catching the man. Kang Hyun quickly went behind his opponent and called out to him. There was a stone clutched in the guy's hand. The monster turned around and Kang Hyun hit him on the head with a stone. Blood sprayed and the goblin began to fall on his back. Finally, it was his turn to die. Kang Hyun is the strongest here. The system congratulated him on passing the second stage. He received an additional 5 statuses as a reward. And now he can choose a weapon. He has the shield skill unlocked and the basic crossbow skill. Kang Hyun was overjoyed. He won. He now has the power of a supreme being, and everyone else is just cheap. The next morning, on the occasion of passing the second stage, Kang Hyun decided to cook breakfast. During breakfast, he heard a strange sound. Haken ran out of her room at this sound. The display window indicated that Earth's training had been completed, and Kang Hyun was now free to use the system outside of training. Kang Hyun and his sister were stunned to read the text and didn't know what it was. The dungeon is now activated. They hurried to the exit and opened their eyes wide in surprise. A door appeared right in front of their house, shrouded in a strange glow. Is this a dungeon? Sietsema announced that the dungeons can only be used by the awakened. Such doors have appeared in many cities around the world. Awakened must complete the dungeon within a certain time. After the introduction of dungeons, the world became more chaotic. At first, Kang Hyun and his sisters decided not to leave the house. They looked and organized the information. Kang Hyun found out that the training was not quite over yet. Recently, those who have just turned 18 have joined him. Akin read that the comments section was in chaos. People think it's a hasty decision to call those who have been trained awakened and send them out to clear dungeons. Kang Hyun tried to open the status window on his own. The window opened, but said that the training was not yet completed, and he could not do it at will. The guy learned that there are 8 stages in training. When he tried to pass the second stage after 7 attempts, others had already completed their training. Is there really no other way but to go through all the stages? He turned to his sister with a request to find information about the third stage. The girl replied that there is no such information. Even very little is said about the second stage. Kang Hyun didn't know whether he should go fight in the third stage. But now he is stronger than ever, and will not suffer a shameful defeat as before. He will tackle the third stage with style and precision. Night came and the third stage of training came. There's a monster rushing towards Kang Hyun right now. The guy is sure that he will kill this bastard. At the third stage, you need to prove your instability and patience by enduring any situation. The victory condition is to destroy the Gurkha leader. The condition for failure is death. Advice: if you wait a long time, the opportunity will eventually appear. Kang Hyun was given a camouflage suit that captured the imagination of men. The guy understood that the new task should be something like liquidation. A monster that Kang Hyun has never heard of. He must be killed. First, you need to find him in this dark forest. To begin with, he decided to check what he received for completing the second stage. Abilities were added: fencing, crossbow, shield, strength increased to 10, agility to 11, endurance to 11. Kang Hyun didn't expect everything to be so good. This is what the status window should look like. The skill descriptions were still annoying. The basic crossbow skill advised that sometimes it is better not to get into a fight, but just shoot in the back like a coward. Kang Hyun decided to invest extra points in strength and endurance, and I wondered whether it was worth adding points to agility. Satima asked him if the guy wanted to check his inventory. In the inventory there was only a sword, which the system called worn, and Kang Hyun immediately pulled him out. It was the most amazing thing the guy had seen so far. It's already dawn. The check is completed. It's time to look for this Gorkha. Carlos Haskok, the legendary Marine Corps sniper who killed an enemy general after crawling 14 kilometers over several days, became the man Kang Hyun respected the most from this day forward. Kang Hyuk himself has been crawling for more than 10 hours and has almost crawled to the spot. Near the settlement, 2 guards are on alert. Maybe it's better to just break through by force. But the guy doubted that he would succeed. The security looked very menacing. The grass is prickly. All sorts of bugs crawl in it. One of the guards was approaching the place where Kang Hyun was hiding. It was incredible, but he couldn't find another place to take a leak. The guy must endure. The notice said he must be patient and persistent. But for this, Kang Hyuk decided that he would cut off the guy's head and jumped out of the ambush. Like a bulldozer, he smashed into the settlement guard and swung his sword. The soldier flew back, unable to withstand such pressure. Kang Hyun was glad that he killed him, but that was not the case. The guard rose to his feet, and with his scream he woke up the entire settlement. People with torches in their hands ran from all sides, and Kang Hyun found himself surrounded. The guy decided that since he was in complete shit anyway, he would at least say the phrase that he had always dreamed of saying. He shouted to the whole forest, "Come on, attack me, you damn bastards!" The system reported that a skill had been created, Lion's Roar of Fury. It all ended sadly. The hero was killed. In the second round, Kang Hyun was ready for this outcome and drew conclusions. The lion's roar of rage reduced the combat effectiveness of enemies, aroused fear in them, and removed all moral prohibitions from the one who uses the roar of rage. After crawling for 10 hours in the first round, he realized that Gurkha warriors go out hunting during the day and return to the village at sunset. In other words, only boys remain among the men in the Denma village, which are easy to deal with. He quickly made his way to the leader's house and ran into it. Now he will quickly kill the leader and will be free. The leader was sitting on the throne. It seemed like he was waiting for Kang Hyun. The leader was surrounded by a lilac glow. He extended his hand. This radiance enveloped Kang Hyun, and the system notified that the guy was under the influence of the low-level magic containment skill. Kang Hyun's body didn't move. The guy was indignant. What kind of training is this in which there is magic? There must be some way around it. He remembered his lion's roar of fury and immediately used it. Blue lights of power rushed from him towards the leader. The magic has dissipated. With the charging sword above his head, Kang Hyun flew up to the leader's throne and delivered the decisive blow. His great plan worked, and the system congratulated the guy on completing the third stage. He received intermediate physical regeneration and the temporary title of Unshakable, which was awarded to the rebel who completed the third stage the fastest. Kang Hyun was pleased that he completed the third stage in just 2 days. In comparison, with the second stage taking a week, this is a huge improvement. With his height, he wondered if it could be that he was a genius. At this rate, he will be able to complete the fourth stage in just a few minutes. He imagined himself in shining armor, standing on the corpse of a terrible monster. That's what he thought a month ago. 25 days have passed since the dispatch of a special squad of awakened ones to clear the dungeon. It was announced that 40% of the dungeons discovered within the country had been cleared. Meanwhile, the awakened continue to participate in purges. And in response to this, the government is considering the issue of paying bonuses. Aiken was preparing breakfast and listening to her brother's enthusiastic screams from his room. If this goes on, the neighbors will file a complaint. Did he get hit in the head with an arrow? A disheveled Kang Hyun left the room and said that he had killed everyone. Aiken reminded him how he went crazy and shouted that he couldn't do it. She put the food on the table and looked at her brother. What happened in his dream? Why has he been acting like this since the morning? Kang Hyun responded gloomily that this training was getting on his nerves. The sister noticed that his face already looked like the face of a criminal. Kang Hyun advised her to speak more politely to him. He is her older brother. She asked how the fourth stage went, and Kang Hyun replied that it was something like a group project. It was necessary to show leadership qualities or something like that. The quest was to lead the group to destroy the dungeon core. It was like a role-playing game. Group members performed their assigned roles. The group did not have enough supplies to continue the mission recklessly. Despite strong opposition from the two couples, the decision was eventually made to move forward. Of course, Kang Hyun did a great job at first. He boosted morale with Roar of Fury and occupied the front lines with the healing power of intermediate body regeneration. Aiken asked if everything was in order. What took him a whole month? Kang Hyun became gloomy. The problem started that night. The two idiots were supposed to take turns on duty, but instead they decided to run away together. When Kang Hyun caught them, they killed him. He knew this from the very beginning, ever since they decided to make love in the sacred dungeon. In any case, the same characters and similar situations were repeated in every episode. And in the end, Kang Hyun found a way out with the help of his brilliant mind. The sister looked at her brother incredulously. He said he decided to just kill all the annoying pests and move on. At the last episode of the fourth stage, disagreements began in the group. Some suggested moving forward. Others believed that this was not worth doing with a limited supply of food. What if they can't find the core? There is enough income from magic stones. If they die, Kang Hyun will be responsible. Kang Hyun suddenly became furious. From now on, everyone will follow his instructions. If they resist, they will die. And even if they complain, they will also die. One of the guys called Kang Hyun crazy, and then he got punched in the face. Kang Hyun started beating him, and said that he told everyone to be silent and not complain. Everyone should follow him because he knows the way. There were dangers along the way. Skeletons attacked a group of people, but Kang Hyun dealt with everyone. The group was shocked. He really took out all the hitters. They stood in the middle of the hall all alone. A core was burning in the middle between the pillars. Kang Hyun decided to simply destroy the pillar. He swung his sword and the pillars scattered. The system congratulated the guy on completing the fourth stage. As a reward, he received the technique, 1 hit, 2 halves, and a ring of strong mind. Considering the results, the increase in the fourth stage was not bad. Ability statistics grew exponentially. not to mention the many items that monsters dropped. Among them, Kang Hyun still did not know the purpose of the magic stone. But if you stock up on everything, you can eventually find a use for it. The one hit, two halves skill and ring of strong mind were also quite good. But the most important thing was that Kang Hyun became quite strong in reality. It seemed to him that weight training had become less effective, and it was time to go to the gym. At this time, an emergency notification came to the guy's phone. The Department of Homeland Security reported the opening of a dungeon in their area. Residents were urged to be careful and advised to stay at home. Cries for help could be heard from the street. The goblins broke out and killed everyone who got in their way. If the dungeon is not cleared, its gates will be open. Kang Hyun suddenly remembered that his sister had gone to work and was now in danger. He needed to find some kind of weapon and ran to the kitchen. There wasn't even a simple sword in the house. But then his gaze fell on the knife lying in the sink. Armed with a knife, he ran out into the street where the goblins were rampaging. They noticed the guy. As expected, Kang Hyun was unable to use the skills just yet. But he attracted the attention of the monsters. They rushed at the guy, making incoherent sounds. There was no guarantee that the goblins would be the same level as in training, but Kang Hyun could already tell their level from their movements. He began to fight off the monsters with a knife, and did it successfully. The goblins, bleeding, fell onto the asphalt. Kang Hyun decided that he would put his knife to good use. In the office where Aiken worked, employees barricaded the door, behind which the roar of monsters could be heard. People were scared and were waiting for help. There was some kind of fuss behind the door. The door was shaking. People did not know what awaited them. Suddenly the barricade shattered, and the door gave way and flew out. Standing on the threshold was Kang Hyun, who said that he didn't want to break the door. He shouted to his sister that her older brother had come to save her. The girl's employees could not come to their senses. Who is this terrible guy? Aiken froze in surprise. The head of the office shouted that the guy broke the barricade and what to do now. Monsters will tear everyone apart. Kang Hyun laughed embarrassedly. He apologizes. There was no way to control the power. But people don't have to worry anymore. The entire corridor was littered with the corpses of monsters. Kang Hyun suggested that the office workers arm themselves by taking the weapons from the dead goblins. He is confident that if no one panics, they can defeat everyone. And he got ready to leave. On the way here, he saw that there were more goblins, and he decided to check the upper floors of the building. You need to do this to sleep peacefully today. At the end of the day, everyone stayed in the office. Aiken washed and bandaged her brother's wounds. If he is so tough, then why was he beaten like that? The brother replied that he had not yet learned to evade. His recovery ability is amazing and he can withstand most attacks, but he can't use his skills. His sister advised him to be careful. If he cannot use the skills, then he will not be able to resurrect. His decision to deal with the monsters in the entire building was excessive. Yeah, it was cool until he got beat up so bad. Night fell and the 5th stage of training began. Kang Hyun stood in the forest and read the conditions, to prove his wisdom, capable of overcoming any difficulties. He stood surrounded by girls who were trying to figure out which of them was a succubus. The conditions of the stage were to defeat a succubus disguised as a human. Those who recognize the essence of the monster will become victims first. Kang Hyun thought about it. Isn't a succubus a demon of dreams, a creature that appears in a dream and sucks a person's life force? They are known to be very beautiful, but all the women here are beautiful, and everyone knows about the existence of a succubus. At this time, a charming girl approached the guy and asked what he thought about all this. He replied lightheartedly that he had no ideas yet. The ring of a strong mind resisted the girl's charms. This ring gave immunity to all effects of mental magic. The group set up camp and lit a fire. Kang Hyun sat by the fire and thought. The first stage is the Inferno Circus. The second stage is a week-long battle with goblins. At the third stage, after crawling for 10 hours, he was pissed on by a warrior. At the fourth stage, a month-long group project from hell awaited him. But now he can enjoy interesting things. He remembered that he had to control his facial expression so as not to become a victim of the monster. The guy covered his face with his hand. If she realizes that he guessed, then he will be finished. A succubus can disguise itself as a human. It is a powerful creature. You can't act rashly. Since a man can fall under the influence of a succubus, he needs a woman to help him. He decided to go to bed and think about everything tomorrow. He opened his eyes and recognized the ceiling of Akin's office. Not expecting this, he jumped up with a wild cry. The people told him that they were just about to wake him up when the army finally arrived. Kang Hyun was beside himself with anger. The succubus noticed that he recognized her and killed him in his sleep. Heavy army vehicles drove through the streets. Heavily armed soldiers jumped to the ground, and they started shooting the monsters. Kang Hyun watched this from the office window. The army has really arrived. Now the people are safe. As expected, the monsters cannot do anything against the weapons of the military. But Kang Hyun felt that this was not the end. It constantly seemed to him that there was great danger ahead. The soldiers continued to kill monsters, but there were no fewer of them. One of the goblins walked towards people despite heavy fire. He swung and killed a soldier in his path. This goblin was still walking and his roar was filling my ears. The soldiers tried to start the car and retreat, but the goblin attacked from a jump, swinging his spear. People died instantly. The remaining cars did not have time to brake and crashed into one another. Kang Hyun watched through the window as panic began among the military. Nobody knew what to do now. The monster jumped into the back and began to deal with people. Then the monster raised its head and looked straight at the guy. The system reported that this monster is a hobgoblin. The soldiers were informed by radio that the 3rd detachment had been hit. Corporal Young Jae-hoon sent a signal for help. At this time, he saw a monster who was already about to dine on them. He asked the radio operator what happened to the reinforcements. The radio operator replied that they had sent one capable civilian. The corporal had a hard time comprehending the news, and he decided that he had gone crazy. At this time, the goblin attacked the military vehicle. The soldier opened fire on the monster, but the golem seemed invulnerable to shots. He swung his halberd, but he didn't have time to strike. A stone slab flew into the goblin's face. He flew back several meters and fell to the ground. While Corporal Jung was taking stock of the situation, Kang Hyun climbed into the car and asked if everything was okay. He understands that it is not easy for soldiers in such a situation. The guy didn't look very attractive. The corporal decided that there was a new monster in front of him and pointed his weapon at him. Kang Hyun shouted at him not to shoot. "He's a man, isn't it clear?" The corporal thought that the volunteer certainly looked strong, and he apologized to the guy for his behavior. He was not himself. He just escaped death. He thanks the guy for his help. Kang Hyun no longer listened to him. He looked at the monster who was already rising to his feet. This is happening again. The bastard is clearly looking Kang Hyun in the eye. If the army was destroyed, these monsters would come to the office where Achin worked. Kang Hyun shouted to the corporal not to shoot, and armed with a knife, rushed to deal with the monster. He asked the corporal if they had tear gas. The corporal replied that there were and almost all operational weapons were loaded. Kang Hyun asked to give him one. The corporal was very surprised. Kang Hyun didn't have time to explain his decision. The corporal only advised him to take a gas mask. As he ran, Kang Hyun shouted to Karpal to make sure that there would be no shooting at Kang Hyun. If the military does anything wrong, it's all over for them. Aiken looked from the window at what was happening and heard the corporal's command for everyone to put on gas masks and be on alert. Shoot only at approaching monsters, and never turn your weapon towards the center of the street. Kang Hyun was approaching the goblin. He hated him and all other monsters. The goblin growled menacingly. One of the soldiers threw a tear gas canister at the monster. The monster coughed. Tears flowed from his eyes and he saw nothing in the clouds of gas. Kang Hyun covered his face with the sleeve of his jacket and, squeezing his knife, approached the enemy. Even though he was a goblin, even though he was a hobgoblin, his weakness was clear to the guy. He deflects the bullets, but this is the first time the monster has felt pain. While the hobgoblin's tolerance for pain is quite high, Kang Hyun's is even higher. The guy rushed to attack the monster. First, we need to confiscate his weapons. The goblin's halberd jumped out of his hand, unable to withstand the blow of Kang Hyun's blade. The guy then attacked the goblin and was surrounded by a glow of power. Corporal Chan looked at the fight and thought that an awakened one was fighting a monster. A surprised voice came from behind him. The man who appeared in the car said in surprise that he believed that he alone was sent to help the military. Kang Hyun continued to fight with the goblin and was thrown back by his blow. He expected that he would not be able to cause much damage to the monster, but he was unable to harm it at all. If this continues, Kang Hyun's stamina will only decline. The guy understood that the only thing he could do now was cut the monster. At this time, a flash of flame surrounded the goblin and someone began to strike him with strong blows. It was the awakened one who was sent to help who entered the battle. In a few moments, he severely wounded the monster with his sword. But the most awakened one had the feeling that he was hitting a stone with a sword, and not the body of a goblin. He determined that the hobgoblin was only an F-rank dungeon boss, but his defense is abnormally strong. Kang Hyun rushed to help the awakened one. This creature has weak points. The fight continued. Kang Hyun's stamina was declining, and his physical strength was not that great. Even though the goblin was wounded, the damage done to him was very small. The sword and knife of the people could not finish him off. They needed weapons. Kang Hyun's gaze fell on the halberd thrown away by the golem. The awakened one shouted to the guy that he did not have enough strength to deliver the decisive blow. He asked him to attack the monster's vital area, while the awakened one held him back. Kang Hyun wondered where this bastard's vital weak spots are. Behind the knee, the skin is thinner there. In desperation, he lunged with his halberd wherever it hit. Blood splashed. The goblin lost his menacing appearance and his eyes bulged. The awakened one was also numb with surprise when he saw how the formidable enemy crouched down. The halberd stuck straight into the monster's backside. Kang Hyun also did not expect such an effect and apologized. For some reason, he felt sorry for the goblin. At that moment, when an unpleasant sensation swept through the hilt of the halberd, a philosophical question flashed through Kang Hyun's head. Is the anus a vital point? The guy doubted that this was the most vital place, the defeat of which could lead to immediate death. The decision was made in an instant, and Kang Hyun's body was already performing the next movement. He lifted the goblin impaled on the point upward, and with force he brought him down to the ground. A monster cannot be made of stone on the inside either. Foam began to flow from the mouth of the defeated monster. He couldn't get up, and Kang Hyun did not stop hitting him. The monster's blood was spilled. The guy finally found his weak spot. While he dealt with the monster, the awakened one stood motionless and looked in amazement at what was happening. Where did such an experienced fighter come from? Is he not registered? How strong is he? Kang Hyun did not suspect that he had made a strong impression on the awakened one. Near the killed monster, he discovered a strange object. The system said that it would not provide information about the subject because Kang Hyun had not yet completed his studies. The guy mentally cursed the training, but decided to take the subject just in case. It might come in handy. An awakened one approached him and said something. Kang Hyun remembered that items found in monsters should be shared with partners, but this guy just appeared in the middle of the battle, and Kang Hyun dealt with the goblin almost single-handedly. So he went to hell. He threw the goblin's halberd to the awakened one, and shouting that he had urgent business, and the guy could keep the weapon, he ran away. Kang Hyun was in a great mood. The awakened one was speechless from such a quick disappearance of the guy. The smoke from the tear gas cleared. The awakened man took off his gas mask and wondered who this man was. A few hours after defeating the hobgoblin, as dusk fell, the situation seemed to calm down a little. Kang Hyun and his sister walked through streets that looked like ruins from a disaster movie, and they were able to return home only after it became dark around. When Kang Hyun ran away, he forgot to close the door and now their apartment was trashed. The sister realized that her brother never grew up. He was still an idiot. The two of them cleaned up and sat down to dinner. Aiken was browsing social media and suddenly let out a loud scream. Then she showed her brother the video on her phone. On the screen, he famously dealt with the hobgoblin. Kang Hyun couldn't believe his own eyes. Apparently, someone took a video from the windows of the building. The comments made Kang Hyun happy. Some really didn't believe that it was real, and everything shown was computer graphics. But mostly the audience admired the hero's courage. True, some noted that he has a villainous face. Kang Hyun went to his room and went to bed. He remembered the fight scene with the hobgoblin. The guy who came to his aid was very cool. I wonder how many stages he went through. Kang Hyun himself was supposed to be eliminated in the second stage. But there's no point in thinking about it now. He is going to go through all 8 stages and become the strongest. Yesterday's succubus was very beautiful. Despite the fact that she killed him, he wants to meet her again. He again found himself in the clearing with his eyes closed. He was looking forward to meeting the beautiful monster. But reality was very different from the dream. A goblin's face appeared in front of Kang Hyun. The guy almost got a heart attack from this sight. And then he knocked out the goblin. What the hell? Where are the goblins from? The system window provided information that the conditions for passing were to evade a horde of cave goblins and clear the dungeon. And she gave advice. Cave goblins have poor eyesight, but excellent hearing. We need to find a way to distract them. While Kang Hyun was reading all the conditions, he was already surrounded by monsters. But he was interested to know why the conditions for passing the stage had changed. This was not what he expected when he fell asleep. Why has everything changed? The next morning, the awakened one, whom we had already met, beat up the office staff. He asked how could someone who hasn't even participated in training yet be stronger than ability users. Training Stage 5, Round 3. The conditions for passing are to defeat a double monster that hides among people and eats them every night. Tip: Paladins and mages can use a unique ability once a day. Kang Hyun stood in a group of people and read a message on the system window that opened. The rest discussed the conditions of passage. It wasn't like finding a succubus in the first round. Suddenly it dawned on Kang Hyun. This is a mafia game. You need to use wisdom to get through it. He used Furious Roar and ordered everyone to gather. From now on, the one who moves becomes guilty. However, he forgot that in the mafia game, usually the chattiest ones die first. He woke up again in his bed. If you think about it, he never won at mafia and was one of the first to drop out. But he didn't expect this. He felt hungry and decided to go to the kitchen. He never thought that he would repeat the same failure for a month and a half. Unrecognizable Kang Hyun stood in front of his sister and was glad that her big brother was so cleverly reborn. Suit, glasses, book in hands. He's unrecognizable. Oken was already warped by the sight of his brother. The guy said that he tried to change his appearance in order to change internally. The sister did not appreciate her brother's efforts. She sincerely asked him not to engage in nonsense, and he was upset. Kang Hyun thought this was the perfect cover. The sister sighed helplessly. The idea that glasses make a guy smarter is ridiculous. He holds the book upside down, and the suit is too small for him. Costume. Where did he get it? They don't have any money anyway. Why does she need such a brother? I'd rather spend the money on food. She'll definitely go crazy with him. Kang Hyun yelled that 53 days had already passed. He died so many times at that damn 5th stage. He must do something. The conditions of the task are to win with the help of wisdom, and the scene changes every time. Even the smartest people can't solve this problem. My sister would rather transplant someone else's brain into this idiot than wait for him to wise up. The 5th stage of training continued, and Kang Hyun found himself in a dungeon. He looked gloomily out the system window. What kind of crap had she prepared this time? But the task inspired him, and an idea came to mind. The conditions for passing are to completely clear the tarantula incubator dungeon. Find the weak points of the spitting tarantula and develop an appropriate strategy. The tarantula was nearby and was about to spit at the uninvited guest. The conditions were simple and understandable, and the guy rushed to attack. Finally, he found a solution to the problem. At this time, the tarantula spat. Sticky mucus enveloped Kang Hyun's body. He didn't read the terms carefully and forgot that this spider spits. His hand turned black. The guy thought with horror that the spider was also poisonous. This was already too much. Grabbing the sword with his good hand, he began to swing it in all directions, trying to hit the monster. He ducked under the monster's belly, and he wounded him with a sword. The sword was stained with the blood of the monster. The system gave a hint that the lead to the tarantula's weak points was hidden in the incubator. In the end, Kang Hyun decided to break through with brute force. Weaknesses. Tips. It doesn't matter, the main thing is to kill. Instead of looking for the key, he will break the door. The monster was defeated. The system congratulated him on completing the 5th stage. His reward will be the strength of a giant. She strengthens the muscles with magical powers. Kang Hyun thought that only those with bad bodies needed brains. In one of the schools in Seoul, Kwon Min-soo did not pay attention to the jokes of his classmates. He was already exhausted after this damn training. He had recently turned 18, and his younger comrades were interested in how he got through the 1st stage. The guy replied that the rumors were true. The stage was terrible. But the hardest part is yet to come. On social networks, they say that only passing the 4th stage allows you to enter the top 1%, and there is no information about the 5th stage at all. They're probably cheating on information. New rumors have appeared that someone who passed the 7th stage yesterday is going to the 8th. The boys read, "The theme of the 4th stage is leadership. Conquer all party members with strength. In the 5th stage, wisdom is important, but muscles are the highest form of wisdom. You need to increase your strength. At the 6th stage, villainy. You must destroy enemies and allies. At the 7th stage, devotion. You can only destroy enemies." Who writes these tips? The author of the messages was ridiculed in the comments. He's lying all the time. He's a loser who hasn't passed a single stage. Kang Hyun almost went crazy with anger. He goes out of his way to share his experiences with people, but they make fun of him. He complained to his sister that he had revealed his learning strategy, but they didn't believe him. My sister is tired of his screams, but Kang Hyun assured her that when he passed the 8th stage, he would become the 3rd graduate to study in Korea. Will rise to the same level as Han Sa-young, the leader of the Dangun Guild, or Choi Dong-woo, the president of the Ability User Alliance. Sestar asked how he could compare himself to geniuses who went through everything in one go. He spent a lot of time on this. Her brother reminded her that he passed the 6th and 7th stages on the first try. The reward for the 6th stage was the weapon Bilan's longsword, which gave berserker skills, and for the 7th, Ronald's armor, which could repair itself. If you complete the 8th stage, then all rewards can be used in reality through the inventory. And Kang Hyun also wanted to check the item that fell out of the hobgoblin. At the 8th stage, the system asked the guy an unexpected question. What are his beliefs? He stood barefoot in an empty space, with only the display window in front of him. Before he had time to answer the question that puzzled him, the walls of space began to crack. The floor underneath was also covered in cracks. And with a cry, Kang Hyun flew into the dark abyss. The flight suddenly stopped. Kang Hyun stood on the street of a crowded city. He was trying to figure out where he was, when suddenly a girl walking towards him. She approached him closely and walked through him, without even blocking anything in its path. Kang Hyun wondered, is he now shapeless like a ghost? The city appeared in training for the first time. Perrin thought that this was an earthly city after all. Residents of the city walked towards him. At first glance they looked normal, but when they came closer to the guy, it became clear that these were not people. The inhabitants of this city were more like lizards. Life in the city went on as usual. Office workers drank coffee, mothers took their children to school. Kang Hyun noticed one alien who was looking intently at the guy. Kang Hyun suspected that he could see him. He seemed so stunned. But after a second, Kang Hyun realized that the passerby's attention was not focused on him. From the hole that opened behind Kang Hyun, monsters poured into the street. Residents of the city ran screaming. A peaceful street turned into a nightmare. Monsters caught and killed people. Among the monsters, there were those that Kang Hyun had already encountered, but there were also those that he had seen for the first time. This was a completely different level compared to what he experienced in the dungeons. These monsters looked like a scene from the apocalypse. The system reminded that a little more than 4 years remained until full connection with the Hakan dimension. Kang Hyun realized what the Earth would look like after this conjunction. He was standing on the street with his head down when suddenly a shadow fell on the ground. He raised his head and saw a huge monster that towered over the skyscrapers and obscured the sky. The giant leaned down and extended his hand. Kang Hyun saw huge fingers above him and covered himself with his hands. At that moment, when it seemed all was over, he was transported into empty space. Someone asked him a question. What did he feel? Kang Hyun was floating in space among the stars, and opposite him, a shadowy figure was forming from the light. The guy asked if God was talking to him or something like that. The figure replied that he was not a god, but rather a dimensional administrator. Kang Hyun tried to comprehend the information and froze. The administrator said that at this stage, Kang Hyun will have a personal conversation with him, and the guy can ask him about anything that interests him. The administrator will in turn ask Kang Hyun questions. The guy immediately asked what he just saw, and will the Earth be the same in 5 years? The administrator replied that it depends on what people do next. Kang Hyun objected indignantly. If such a powerful being is in front of him, then why doesn't he stop this situation himself? The administrator is not a guardian. His task is not to protect but to maintain balance. The best he can do is give people a window of status and training. It was the administrator's turn to ask questions, and he asked Kang Hyun what beliefs guided him, and why did he survive until now. The guy didn't understand at all why such deep questions. After observing people after this event, the administrator became curious. All intelligent beings are interesting, but people especially. Kang Hyun was infuriated by this. This fucking administrator was a bad watcher. No one around Kang Hyun lives thinking about such nonsense. People are just fighting to be a little happier since birth. They just survive day by day. The next question was whether Kang Hyun had something that he wanted to protect. The guy answered that he had to protect his family. Has he ever thought about becoming a hero? The guy replied that after several of his deaths, he understood his place in the world. Such a cool but exhausting job, becoming a hero is not for him. Based on the administrator's observations, the heroes definitely have natural talent. Kang Hyun doesn't have it. The guy decided that he was going to punch the administrator in the face, but he extended his hands woven from light to him and declared that he was a fan of Kang Hyun. He was very happy when he watched the guy undergo training. The joy of watching him teach? Is this guy a sadist? Kang Hyun suddenly asked. At the 5th stage, where the condition for passing is wisdom, should the task change every time? The administrator's figure began to melt. He said that he was very pleased to talk with Kang Hyun, who disappeared. The system congratulated the guy on completing the 8th stage. From the depths of space came the words that learning is just the beginning. New challenges await the guy, and whether Kang Hyun wants it or not, the administrator believes that the guy will become a hero who will save the world. Kang Hyun cursed and demanded that his interlocutor not leave. He realized that the administrator did everything to ensure that Kang Hyun passed the 5th stage. This son of a bitch has completely disappeared. Kang Hyun could only curse helplessly. The system reported that Kang Hyun became the 62nd person to complete the training and received the title of training graduate. Kang Hyun woke up with a gag in his mouth. Clearing his throat, he pulled the sock out of his mouth. The sister calmly told him that he had annoyed her and all the neighbors with his screams, and she shut his mouth. Judging by the expression on his brother's face, he failed the stage again. I wonder how long it will take him to complete it. Kang Hyun opened the system window in front of Aiken and boasted that he was now the most capable. He went through everything. My sister wasn't very impressed. She advised his brother to go and earn some money and invited him to have breakfast. After breakfast, the sister went to work, and her brother sat on the sofa and opened the system window. Apart from the title, all other effects apply only 50%. He applied his training graduate title and reached for the box next to him. He had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Now he can reveal the essence of the mysterious item he received after defeating the hobgoblin. Magic Explosion is a skill book that allows you to learn the Magic Explosion skill. Ability: shoots a magical sphere with explosive force. The book of skills and skills fell into his hands. After 4 months of screaming openly, Kang Hyun has finally mastered the art of silent screaming. But this did not diminish his joy. An invaluable acquisition. Of course, he wants to learn the Magic Explosion skill. The book shone with a bright light, and the skill was obtained. Now that the loot is sorted, should Kang Hyun apply for admission to the Awakened Training School? And Min, a newly appointed civil servant. Her first job is the Awakened Training School, where those who complete the training must receive a certificate. The Awakened education system in Korea is rapidly developing and becoming one of the best in the world. We believe that this happened because a similar system already existed. They may be newcomers, but they are already future heroes. Watching them begin their journey is incredibly rewarding. This is what Min thought just a few hours ago. Now she was sitting at the table and could not raise her head from the problems that had befallen her. In front of her stood a gloomy thug who showed his ID. The girl looked at the ID and burst into tears. Kang Hyun was surprised. What's happened? Through sobs, Min asked why they were all doing this to her. Kang Hyun's eyes widened. He tried to calm the girl down and asked what her problem was. People in line began to pay attention to them. They said disapprovingly that he had made the employee cry and had offended her. Kang Hyun genuinely didn't understand what he did wrong. Instructor Kim Yi-hyun walked past the line and saw that the application process was slow and decided to find out what was wrong. When he saw Kang Hyun, he froze in place. Kang Hyun stared at the instructor. He seemed familiar to him. Kim Yi-hyun walked to the table and took Kang Hyun's ID. In the photo, the guy looked completely different than in life. Kang Hyun swore that his appearance changed due to the skill. The instructor looked at the guy in surprise. Kang Hyun indicated that he had completed training up to the 5th stage. The guy played it down so as not to attract attention. The instructor drew attention to Kang Hyun's level, 12th. He asked if the applicant had carried out an illegal raid on the dungeon. Kang Hyun reduced the level by half, but it was still too high. He admitted that he entered the dungeon before the law was passed. Then Kim Yi-hyun asked, what does the applicant mean when he writes that his unique ability is masculine strength? Kang Hyun explained that this ability temporarily doubles his strength. Kim Yi-hyun asked the last question. At the 3rd stage, the awakened ones receive a skill. At the 4th, an accessory. At the 5th, another skill. He needs to see all these awards. The meticulous instructor annoyed Kang Hyun, but still the guy showed him a huge fist and said that this was a skill of the 3rd stage. Then he bit his hand until it bled, and he showed the skill of self-healing and rapid regeneration. He received the mind ring in the 4th stage. Kang Hyun remembered that he transformed the giant's strength into the human strength as his unique ability. In addition, he had the ability to instill fear in his enemies by shouting. He can use it here. Kim Yi-hyun didn't mind, and Kang Hyun got ready to shout, but then there was one guy in line who was staring at him. Suddenly he recognized the guy, and remembered that the goblin slayer he had seen in videos on social networks was standing in front of them. Suddenly a terrible scream was heard, and all the people covered their ears and began to run away in panic. Kang Hyun fell silent and asked the instructor if he was happy. Kim Yi-hyun invited Mr. Kang Hyun to go to the 2nd floor of the nearby Hongmu building. The guy who recognized Kang Hyun watched their conversation. He looked after Kang Hyun as he left and smiled strangely. So Kang Hyun almost got rejected from school because he didn't look like his ID photo. But after he attracted everyone's attention with his roar, he was accepted and began training. The students recognized him and discussed how he loudly shouted at the woman that she had fainted. Kang Hyun saw that the students did not like him. He sat gloomily in the audience alone. Not far from him sat the same guy who recognized Kang Hyun as the Goblin Slayer. The audience included school leaders and teachers. Kim Yi-hyun introduced himself and said that he would be conducting training at the Seongnam branch of the Awakened Training School. The training will consist of 10 days of morning and afternoon practical training. Food and accommodation will be provided to students. If there are no major problems, everyone will be able to complete the course and receive a certificate. Everyone knows that 6 months have passed since the world changed. Every day there is new information about dungeons and monsters. Therefore, tactics and strategies are also constantly evolving. In other words, what students are learning now is not exactly the right thing to do. Information may become irrelevant or useless. Therefore, in school, students will be taught only what is necessary for their survival. This concluded the first lecture. There was a 10-minute break before the next lesson. Kang Hyun was desperately missed. Will they do this nonsense for 10 days? A huge man approached him, extended his hand and said that his name was Guak Su-il. Kang Hyun didn't like this guy, but he still shook his hand and told him his name. Su-il grabbed the guy's hand tightly and used force. He believed that a guy like Kang Hyun should be put in his place from the very beginning. He squeezed his hand more and more tightly. He didn't like Kang Hyun from that moment when he started causing a commotion over a trifle, but the strong handshake didn't seem to bother Kang Hyun at all. Su-il didn't understand how the guy could stand him. Everything was very simple. Kang Hyun activated the giant's power. She increased muscle strength 12-fold. Su-il realized that he, who had dedicated his whole life only to developing strength, realized that he was losing. People have already begun to pay attention to them. Some students directly said that the two were fighting. Su-il couldn't stand there and look pathetic. He squeezed his hand with all his might, his face contorted with tension and anger. Kang Hyun also increased his strength, and Su-il's hand was torn apart. Muscles, tendons, skin parted and blood sprayed out. Su-il froze in shock. Kang Hyun also silently looked at his opponent. And after some time, an ambulance drove away from the school, and Kang Hyun angrily yelled that everything he said was true. This man came up first to introduce himself. Then he grunted and swelled his arms, and then burst with a loud noise. Kim Yi-hyun couldn't believe it. Kang Hyun shouted that it was all true. And if it weren't for his unique ability giant strength, which increased his strength by 1.5 times, he could have suffered. You can check the security camera to make sure he is telling the truth. Kim Yi-hyun recalled that Kang Hyun said that his ability is called male strength, and it increases the strength by 2 times, not 1.5. Kang Hyun was embarrassed and said that he was confused by the numbers. Kim Yi-hyun sighed and told the guy to go back to class. Kang Hyun sat down gloomily in his seat in the audience. He was so exhausted on the first day. Some guy asked him for permission to sit together. Kang Hyun didn't mind, but thought that today was not a good day. First he was accosted by a muscular pig, and now by some kind of freak. The guy introduced himself as Yu-sung. Yu-sung was already a fan of Kang Hyun. He asked if he could call Kang Hyun brother, and said that he had just turned 18 and had already graduated. Yu-sung continued to chat, and excitedly asked how Kang Hyun made that guy's hand explode. Is this a unique skill? Kang Hyun is even more convinced that this guy is a real freak. He swore that he didn't do anything. At this time the second lesson began, and Kim Yi-hyun came into the office. He started the lecture. Currently, dungeons are divided into 2 types, normal and incomplete. Regular ones are the most common. They are usually opened 4 weeks after emergence. As many students already know, the opening of a dungeon refers to the phenomenon when monsters begin to emerge from it. An incomplete dungeon is a dungeon whose opening time cannot be predicted. This can happen either before or after 4 weeks, so you need to be on the lookout. There are 2 ways to prevent the dungeon from opening. One of them is to clear the dungeon by targeting the central, or main core. Another way is to periodically remove regular cores to delay the opening of the dungeon. However, you need to be careful with the order in which you attack the cores. At this moment, the lecturer was interrupted by a loud voice in the audience. The big guy from the audience said that he didn't want to listen to useless chatter. He needs to know if there is something to fight monsters. Kang Hyun turned around and said that these stupid muscular jocks were nothing but problems. He did not consider himself stupid. Kim Yi-hyun invited the brawler to go downstairs. He came down with joy, stood up, spread his arms and asked what would happen now. Kim Yi-hyun noted the time on his phone and announced that he would dodge and block the student's attacks for 1 minute. If he even touches the instructor's body, he can consider that he has completed the course. And if he fails, he will be expelled. Is he sure he wants to do this? Kang Hyun and Yu-sung both thought that the second hunk was very annoying, but the spectacle promises to be funny. Both guys prepared to watch the performance with interest. Kim Yi-hyun asked the big man again if he was sure that he would not regret his choice. He laughed and pulled out a real sword. Is the instructor confident that he will not regret it? The guard warned Kim Yi-hyun about the danger, but he replied that everything was in order and stepped towards the enemy. The thug decided that the end had come for the instructor and attacked him. Kim Yi-hyun stood still. He quietly dodged his opponent's sword and said that attacks made with warning are pointless. Even if the person does not attack from behind, surprise is the basis of the attack. He dodged the next furious attack with his sword, and he ended up behind the attacker. The enemy will not wait for the thug to attack. The muscular jock flew into a rage and began to randomly swing his sword, but the instructor was elusive. He also managed to say that simply swinging a sword is not enough. You need to be able to observe and understand how the enemy moves without missing a single blow. The completely enraged opponent shouted that he would stop talking nonsense, and he swung his sword with force. Kim Yi-hyun ducked under the sword, and he continued his lecture. Attacking with all your might is not always the best approach. This inevitably makes the movements larger, and as a result, the gaps in the defense increase. With these words, he delivered a terrifying kick to his opponent. He knocked the sword out of his hands, and the sword stuck into the ceiling. The big man sat down on the floor, and Kim Hyun continued that if you do this, you can get tired quickly. 1 minute has passed. Time's up. The students in the audience were speechless by what they saw. Kang Hyun saw a video of a professional boxer dodging punches from a common man. But to be able to do that against someone with the ability, Kang Hyun couldn't believe that even among the awakened ones there was such a difference. The instructor demonstrated such speed and reaction speed that even Kang Hyun, who had improved his performance, would have a hard time following him if they met in a one-on-one duel. Kang Hyun was watching the fight and really wanted to fight the instructor. Turning his attention to his neighbor, Kang Hyun noted that he had an unusually idiotic expression on his face. The guy is probably crazy. Probably shouldn't have allowed him to sit next to you. I wouldn't want people to think they look alike. The curriculum of the Awakened School consisted of theoretical classes in the morning and practical classes in the afternoon. At today's training, students practiced weapons handling techniques. Kim Hyun suggested that everyone get weapons. At first, everyone will train in their own way, and assistant instructors will correct mistakes. There can be no individual lessons because there are few instructors. Kang Hyun chose the sword. Yoo-sung approached him and offered to train together, but Kim Hyun shouted that sparring was prohibited until the 6th day of training. All the students began to show their skills, and Kang Hyun saw that their level was very low. He decided he'd better practice punches for practice, which he immediately began to do. The sword was flying in his hand. Kim Hyun turned his attention to the guy, and he began to watch him. One of the instructors noticed that Kang Hyun was doing lunges incorrectly. In this stance, you need to slightly narrow your legs and change the angle of the sword. Otherwise, it seems that the guy is showing off, but in practice, it is useless. As Kang Hyun will see when he enters the dungeon, it is difficult to use sword skills in real combat. The guy didn't understand what the instructor was talking about. He grabbed him by the clothes and pulled him towards him. Is the instructor so good at fighting that he can give him advice? Maybe then they can try it together. Kim Hyun asked all students to stop practicing. From this moment on, a sparring session will take place between one of the students and the assistant instructor. Kang Hyun and the instructor were frozen in silence. Kim Hyun continued. Instructor Seong-han will follow the instructions just given, and student Kang Hyun will continue to swing the sword as usual. They will only have one exchange of blows. The opponents stood opposite each other. 1, 2. On the count of 3, Kang Hyun charged. Seong-han put out his sword and blocked his opponent's blow. Kang Hyun furiously continued to slash with his sword, disarmed the instructor, and he began to fall back, unable to withstand such a fierce attack. Knocking the opponent to the ground, Kang Hyun stepped back. All spectators silently looked at the result of the sparring. Kim Hyun said the weapon skills the students are now training should prepare them for real combat. They train their body to respond immediately to an attack. However, as student Kang Hyun showed, we must not forget that the most important thing is to react at the right moment. Kim Hyun offered to applaud the two fighters for their excellent display of skills. Kim Hyun thanked Seong-han for agreeing to take on such an unfavorable role, and he apologized to him for the inconvenience caused. He just wanted to test some of his guesses. Kang Hyun kept himself a precious training diary. There he wrote down everything that happened to him. On the first day, one big guy started a fight with him, and the guy taught him a lesson. The guy in Yoo-sung acts friendly, but he seems to be crazy. The theoretical classes were boring, and the practical ones weren't very useful. The second day was not much different from the first. In the morning everyone studied theory, and in the afternoon there were practical classes. There was more weapon training, and Yoo-sung was very excited. Kang Hyun decided that he had better stay away from this guy. On the third day, the only one who spoke to Kang Hyun was Yoo-sung. But when asked how many stages he went through, he answered that it was a secret. On the fourth day, Kang Hyun felt depressed and drew pictures in his diary. In practice, he practiced striking with 2 swords. The 5th day met a bored Kang Hyun. He wanted to go home, but during practical classes he simply lay on the ground. On the 6th day, it was so boring that the guy did not raise his head from the table. He asked if Yoo-sung wanted to cause a little trouble. He replied that his friend himself said that he needed to study well and complete the course. Kang Hyun directly said that if Yoo-sung gets kicked out, it will be his problem. Yoo-sung was surprised at how easily his comrade could say nasty things to others. However, he noticed that today was the 6th day, and sparring would begin today. He feels that something interesting will happen. His intuition tells him this. Yoo-sung smiled mysteriously. During an afternoon training session, the assistant instructor missed a blow with a sword and was disarmed. The instructor announced that Kang Hyun had won and the next group prepared to fight. Kang Hyun returned to the place where Yu Sung approved his fight. Kang Hyun was not happy. It seemed to him that this was all a child's game. He was surprised by the low level of the students. He didn't know much about talents, but it seemed to him that ordinary people couldn't go through many of the stages. They were told that sparring would continue until the 8th day. Will they all continue to do boring nonsense? The students continued sparring with varying degrees of skill. One of the instructors stopped the tip of his weapon a few centimeters from his opponent's face. Kim Yi-hyun stopped the fight. He announced the winner to Kim Chan. Kang Hyun noted that this instructor is not bad. It's better to fight him or Kim Yi-hyun. Yu Sung was supposed to fight in the next group. He walked towards the stage with Kang Hyun watching him. He had a bad feeling. Yu Sung isn't going to cause trouble? But if there is an instructor on stage, then nothing terrible can happen. Yu Sung's partner was Lee Yuri, a magician. She will use a personal weapon instead of a training weapon. The girl had a staff in her hands. This will give her an advantage due to the lack of space. Yu Sung didn't mind, but Yu Sung had a mace in his hands, although in training he always used a sword. Yu Sung replied that there is no rule that prohibits the use of different weapons. The fighters went to different corners, and Kim Yi-hyun gave the signal to start the battle. Lee Yuri raised her staff, directed magical energy towards her opponent and attacked him. Yu Sung repelled the magical waves with his mace. It was very impressive. The audience watched the fight with bated breath. Kang Hyun saw magic in real life for the first time. This means that it can be learned, depending on how successful you are in learning. Perhaps the girl trained separately. Kang Hyun didn't see her during practice. Lee Yuri was annoyed that her first attack failed. She activated the crystal and repeated the attack with redoubled force. Yu Sung watched as the magic crystal flew towards him. He glanced at instructor Kim Yi-hyun. He raised his mace towards the flow of magic and began to spin this flow. Kang Hyun saw that something strange was happening in Yu Sung's actions. He twisted the trajectory of the magical flow, and he deliberately directed him towards instructor Kim Yi-hyun. Kim Yi-hyun dodged the magic fist flying at him and cleared the way to Lee Yuri. And Yu Sung, armed with a mace, rushed past the instructor who did not have time to react, and rushed at the girl, not paying attention to the loud cries of Kim Yi-hyun that the fight was over. The girl was seriously injured, and Yu Sung threw his hand up in a gesture of victory. His shining face was splattered with blood. This bastard turned out to be even crazier than Kang Hyun thought. First aid was urgently provided to the victim, and an ambulance was called. Lee Yuri suffered a compound fracture of his right arm. Kim Yi-hyun pointed his sword at Yu Sung and asked what he just did. Hyun admitted the mistake, but such cases can happen during sparring. Kim Yi-hyun didn't believe him. He called a 15-minute break and demanded that Yu Sung come with him. Kang Hyun no longer paid attention to his friend. His attention was focused elsewhere. The blade that Kim Yi-hyun used to stop Yu Sung was familiar to him. The one who awakened in the battle with the hobgoblin had exactly the same one. Despite the incident, sparring continued for 2 more days. Yu Sung was not expelled and continued to participate in training, but it seems that he was marked as a suspect. The instructors and assistants behaved extremely carefully with him. Even a healer was on hand during training. Thanks to all this, the 8th day passed without incident. Everything was going too well until Kang Hyun walked into Kim Yi-hyun's office, and he didn't offer him a duel with real swords. Kim Yi-hyun lowered his head into his hands. This course was particularly grueling. Graduation is in 2 days. Can we let it pass peacefully? And who allowed the student to break into the teacher's office without warning? Kang Hyun openly asked, is the instructor also feeling uneasy? Is it true that they have already met before? Indeed, they met. And thanks to Kang Hyun, we were able to prevent additional destruction last time. Now Kim Yi-hyun agreed to a duel with real swords, and they met in the training room. Kim Yi-hyun turned his attention to Kang Hyun's sword. The guy said that he went through 5 stages, and this sword is a reward for completing the 6th. How did this happen? Kang Hyun said that he simply found this sword while clearing out. Kim Yi-hyun realized that the guy would not answer his questions, opened the system window. He took out his blades from the inventory, and he attacked the enemy with words, which will show him what he finds during sweeps. With lightning speed, he was behind Kang Hyun, but he reacted no less quickly, and repelled the attack with a blow of his sword. Kim Yi-hyun thought his opponent was focused on strength, but his agility was also impressive. Kang Hyun replied that if a person is only good in water, it makes him vulnerable. And since he has the ability to recover, he asks the instructor not to be shy and to attack with full force. Kim Yi-hyun promised that he would not hold back and disappeared. This time he attacked Kang Hyun from above, and the guy began to fight off powerful blows. The instructor assessed the enemy, who easily held his own in battle with him. The guy had incredible physical strength. His recovery skills were very effective. Kang Hyun himself was glad that he was finally fighting a worthy opponent. Kim Yi-hyun decided that he needed to be more aggressive and create a gap in the enemy's defense with continuous attacks. He achieved this, and his blade wounded Kang Hyun in the arm. He was about to pull out the weapon and break the distance, but was unable to do so. It seemed as if Kang Hyun had caught his blade in his wound. Kang Hyun's face lit up with joy. His opponent fell into a trap. He got as close to him as possible and delivered a strong headbutt to Kim Yi-hyun's forehead. He fell to the floor without a word. He lost. Then they applied ice to the instructor's injured head and opened a can of beer. They sat on the floor and each believed that his opponent was very strong. Kang Hyun said that this sparring was a draw. They agreed not to use the skills, but he did. Kim Yi-hyun replied that he had won then, and the cadet could be expelled for cheating. Kang Hyun yelled indignantly that this is a passive skill, and nothing can be done with it. The next day, a dungeon exploration training session was scheduled. The door to it was surrounded by barbed wire. The figure of a man in a cloak with a hood appeared near the door at night. The man walked slowly to the door. He opened it and went inside. The door slowly closed behind him. In the morning, the whole group came to the door. This F-rank dungeon was called Geika Forest. She stood in the middle of a residential area. The Geika monsters that appeared here were stronger than the monsters in the F-rank dungeons. But there were two reasons why this place was chosen as a training place. The first is a field-type dungeon and there are traps. But other than monsters, there are no threats here. Secondly, Geikas do not live in groups, so you can lure them somewhere and deal with them one by one. More detailed information will be given to the cadets when they enter the dungeon. For Kang Hyun, this was the first time he entered a dungeon in real life. The students began to go inside as a group. Everyone had a slight feeling of levitation when passing through the door. When Kang Hyun opened his eyes, he found himself in another world. It was surrounded by tropical forest. Palm trees grew everywhere. A river flowed among the hills. Kang Hyun wanted to know if this dungeon is a portal or a gate. Will he be able to return to where he came from? An Yu-sung, who was standing nearby, replied that this was explained in class and yes, you can come back. Kim Yi-hyun, who accompanied the group, said that 100 assistants would lure Geika and conduct a demonstration. After this, students will lure one monster at a time in a group of 5. Cadets should stay in open areas where it is easier to fight. Geika is a bird-type monster, a little over 2 meters tall and similar to an ostrich. Its distinctive features are fast legs and a strong beak. The beak attack can penetrate even plate armor. Since this creature is deadly, extreme caution is required. The standard strategy is to surround the monster with several people and tie its legs. Suddenly, the windows of the system opened in front of the cadets, in which it was written that the central core of the dungeon had been removed and a portal to the outside had opened. The dungeon will collapse soon. Please everyone leave. The cadets left the dungeon. It was already beginning to collapse. Kim Yi-hyun commanded that people enter the portal one at a time without panic. In the schoolyard, Kim Yi-hyun was counting the students who had left. Everyone was there. He was thinking about who cleared the dungeon when his assistant caught his attention. The dungeon was filled with smoke and lit up with threatening lights. Kim Yi-hyun believed his eyes. He urgently demanded to request support and for the cadets to leave the battlefield. The dungeon breakthrough began quickly and unexpectedly for people. Kang Hyun approached the instructor, who was glad to receive the support. In such a dungeon breakout, a strong cadet can be useful. Kang Hyun couldn't understand how this happened. Kim Yi-hyun quickly said that if the destruction and removal of the main core did not kill the boss monster, then when the dungeon collapsed, the remaining monsters would jump out through the portal. This is called breaking a dungeon. Before he could finish speaking, the first monster came out. Kim Yi-hyun ran to prepare the students how to behave in the danger zone and left Kang Hyun to fight the monsters. The instructor organized the cadets into groups of 5. If they did not follow the instructions, they could die. Kang Hyun turned around. A crowd of creatures rushed towards him from the doors. How can he deal with them all? Unexpectedly, Yunsun came to his aid, belligerently waving his mace. And one Geika has already hit him on the head with it. The creature screamed and sank, unable to withstand such a blow. Kang Hyun watched in numbness as An Yun-sung deftly beats the monsters. As expected, the best way to crush them is with a mace. Kang Hyun thought that such a crazy person on the backup instills confidence. The guy pulled out his sword and joined in the fun. He rushed at the creatures and began to chop them with all his might. Now Yunsun watched him work. Kang Hyun shouted to his partner to cover his ears and activate Lion's Roar of Fury. From his cry about chicken-headed bastards, the monster birds froze and opened their beaks wide. Their courage was fading before our eyes. This cry was also heard by the people who were fighting the monsters. Everyone noticed that these creatures became weaker. Kim Yi-hyun remembered that it was Kang Hyun's skill. Kim Yi-hyun really hoped that support would come now, and everything would work out. Kang Hyun was calling out a magical explosion at this time. which left a roasted corpse of the monster. Yunsen was delighted with his friend's abilities. Can he also do magic? Kang Hyun answered evasively that he acquired this skill some time ago. But there was no time to relax. There was a roar from the dungeon, and the boss monster mutant Gaika came out. Kim Ye-hyun thought in despair that there was still no reinforcement, and this monster is so huge and strong. But the two idiots were not afraid. On the contrary, they quarreled over which of them would kill this monster. Everyone wanted to do it themselves.